Okay, good evening. Welcome to chapters 21 and 22. And apologies for starting this video a bit late. I could lie and blame technical difficulties. I could try and be a bit dramatic and say after the twist at the end of the last chapter I was keeping all in suspense. Or I could just be completely honest and say I was asleep on the sofa and Julie had to actually ring me up and yeah. Rather tired today. Might have been something to do with an extremely late night last night, but anyway, moving on from that, we've got things to do. Not least after, at the end of the previous chapter, Ewan was right in the middle of negotiating his way, well, out of not being killed by the Lord, having gone up to him and tried to negotiate for their weapons back. Except, no, you didn't get the weapons back, but at least Nicholas Grant announced to the whole Citadel that there's going to be no food drops for the whole prison until all four of them have been found and murdered. And he was right next to the most heavily armed person in the whole of the prison at the time. Anyway, today's discussion question, really simple one. What's your favourite novel of all time? Thank you, Paul. I find that honesty is generally the best policy, especially when you're just terrible at lying and also you kind of got moral issues against it anyway. Also, if the truth is, let's face it, a little bit funny. Anyway, so a quick drink and then chapter 21. Chapter 21. Kate was undecided about the existence of miracles, but there was no other way to describe the timing. She had made it to the toilet block just moments before Nicholas Grant's voice had boomed across the Citadel, and the others had secured the entrances as he had finished his death threat. She switched on her mobile phone, although a quivering thumb needed several attempts to hit the right button. The worst dictator in British history just mentioned me by name, she thought. Then he shared my biggest weakness with millions of people, as in describing her background, severe anxiety and the rest of it. And after that, he told them to kill me. She was okay for now. The toilet block had only one entrance for Charlie to guard, which was fortunate, since he held the team's last remaining handgun. And there must have been 100 people in the growing crowd outside, ready to charge the block. Even then, Kate still felt the temptation to peek outside, just in case James was one of them. Then gunshots sounded. Kate dropped the phone in fright and brought her hands to her mouth. The gunshot hadn't come from Charlie. It had been somewhere in the distance, perhaps a mile away. Seems like the perfect moment to check Paul's answer to... Oh, thank you. Well, I had to press the C more button for the second line, but if you really do think Underdogs is the best novel of all time, then wow, thank you very much. That's an enormous compliment. The only armed people within a mile of the block were Ewan and the Lord's gang, and they were probably stood next to each other. Oh no, if the Lord shot first. Every negative possibility ran through Kate's mind. The positive ones politely stayed at the back of the queue and let her anxiety do the talking. Ewan's weapon had been found, and he had been murdered as punishment. Or he had shot himself to avoid a prolonged death. Or he had fired a warning shot and was trying to sneak his way free. Or, most likely of all, the Lord had simply heard Grant's threat and shot Ewan dead. Kate, whispered Jack, I'm sorry, but your 3 minutes have started. Kate looked to the floor. Her phone was powered up. She had never been less ready to talk in her life, but out of habit she leapt out of her comfort zone anyway. As she picked up the phone, her thoughts turned to Jack. Oh yeah, revelation about Jack in the last chapter. It's been very gently implied in previous chapters, but in the last one, Nicholas Grant just declared that he's survived 2 suicide attempts. He basically tried to describe them all by their negatives to make them sound as not worth saving as possible, so that people would kill them to get their food back. Hello, Marianne. Her thoughts turned to Jack, that wonderful friend who Grant had presented to New London in a dreadful light. Jack's brain had always been a complex and interesting place, complex enough to have masked a harmful history that she could never have known. Kate could hardly turn to him and say, Jack, "I'm so sorry you tried to kill yourself twice," but she wanted to express some kind of sympathy. "Don't see him any differently," she told herself. "Grant wants it, and Jack doesn't deserve it." She shook her head and rechecked the row of toilet holes for a fourth time. They were still alone, and the block still stank to holy hell. It had a thickness to its air, a dreadful darkness, and enough fumes to give her coughing fits. The block's single exit served as its own lead ventilation and light source. The sensory onslaught had reduced her brain to a foggy mush, and combined with her survival anxiety, she could barely function as a human. I think I just spotted something that I'm going to need to refer to later. Give me a second. Okay. Bitter was the best place to be. If Charlie hadn't run back in time with Ewan's message, the locals would have mown through the Rowlands' home and physically ripped them to shreds. Kate dialed the number for comms and ducked at the sound of another gunshot. This one had been close. Charlie had spent a bullet to frighten the crowd backwards, and it had been enough. For another few minutes at least. Why are they holding back at all? They must know our bullets will run out if they just storm the place. Maybe they were just waiting for another person to go first. "Hello?" came a frantic voice in the earpiece. It wasn't McCormick. The comms team must have swapped over during the 2 days. Instead, it was a voice Kate had missed almost as much. "Raj?" she cried. She put the phone in front of her face, but saw the screen was blank. In the midst of anxiety and sensory overload, she had forgotten to make it a video call, and missed the chance to see her boyfriend's face again. "Kate? You're alive?" "Yeah, for now. There's a crowd of people after us. I mean, actual people, prisoners." Raj's voice died a quick death. Raj's happy voice died a quick death. "You're not..." "Put it on speaker," came Lorraine's whisper in the background, another voice that felt like soft music in Kate's ears. "You're in the inner city?" asked Raj. "How on earth did that happen?" "Ewan tricked a laser cannon into blasting a hole in the wall. It was our only escape." "We may have been better off dying in the corridor, though," Kate thought, as somebody entered a screaming match against Charlie. It was only silenced when the teenager threatened him with a handgun and yelled something about not wanting to miss his birthday party. "I think Charlie turned 16... Yeah, he's 1 day away from turning 16. "Who's with you?" asked Lorraine. It was a kind euphemism for asking who was still alive, and even Kate could see through it. "Ewan, Charlie and Jack," she replied, blocking the thought of Ewan and that faraway gunshot. "But Alex, I don't think..." Her voice trailed off, and her heart started to punch the front of her chest. She was dealing with too many emotional topics at once. "Hello, Ronnie." "Kate," said Raj with delight in his voice. "Hi, Sarah." "Alex got out. He spent the last 2 days in a nearby village recovering from a shoulder wound. He's waiting to see if you guys made it." And that was enough. The tears started to flow. Not through sadness, but through the intense cocktail of good and bad emotions. The wonder of Alex's survival against the unknown fate of Ewan. The joy of hearing Raj against the fright of hearing Grant. Her confusion about Alex's selfless loyalty to his doomed team against her guilt for ever thinking negative thoughts about him. "Kate?" asked Raj. "I don't have much time," she began. "So..." "2 minutes," whispered Jack, who couldn't tell it was the wrong moment to hurry her. "Okay, it's even worse than we thought in here. Everyone's built their houses from wood and metal and stuff that's been thrown down to them. It's miles and miles of crowded floor space. People die here all the time, but the place is still crowded. It's like..." Kate dipped her gaze to the sticky floor and realised she had neither the time nor the skill to come up with a decent analogy. New London could not be compared to anything she had ever experienced. "Anyway," she continued, "we made some enemies, and a few minutes ago Grant offered a reward for our deaths, so now the whole city's trying to kill us." "What kind of reward?" asked Lorraine. "Is it something people would kill for?" "Their food supply." The silence after her words was dreadful. Kate shuddered and filled up the silence with more words. "We're planning to break out," she said. "Hopefully the same way we got in. We just need to get our weapons back." Outside, a lady pushed her 2 malnourished daughters in front of her. After saying their names, she begged Charlie for the chance to kill him. "And if we survive the night," Kate continued, "we'll strike at dawn, as long as the streets aren't crowded." "Good luck," said Raj. "I'll be praying for you all." 1 minute left, said Jack. "I think we'll need more than faith, Raj. I'm sorry to say this, Kate, but faith is one thing you've never been good at. Kate wasn't sure whether to feel surprised or hurt. Her brain chose both. What's that supposed to mean? Kate, I know you've been through a ton of horrible stuff in your life, but religious or not, have faith in something. Maybe you should have some faith in yourself. The phone trembled in Kate's hand. She could have sworn she heard Lorraine in the background, whispering something like, "About time someone said it." And worst of all, they weren't wrong. Right back to her childhood years, there had been very little for Kate to love about herself. Her gymnastics expertise may have stopped her from completely drowning in self-esteem issues, but once the gym chalk left her hands, there had been nothing else to help her. Maybe in a world full of autistic people she'd have been appreciated, but the real world had never seen her as worthy of respect, so neither had she. This wasn't the time to talk about her faults, especially the incurable ones. Faith in herself was impossible when she didn't even like herself. She dodged the point as well as she could. "I'd rather have bullets than a belief," she said. "I'm not arguing against having weapons," said Raj. "I'm saying never underestimate faith, or having a positive opinion about yourself. Faith can turn a person's life around with just thoughts. Think about it, that's amazing. The only thing bullets can do is kill people." Hi, Tom. There was a rumble from outside, like the sound of unorganised mass footsteps. "Yeah," said Kate. "They seem to be pretty good at that." It happened too fast for Kate to see it. She heard a grunt from Charlie and half a yell from Jack before they fell silent, and by the time she turned her head, they lay unconscious on the dark concrete. Charlie's pistol had vanished from his hand, held in some henchman's fierce grip. He was followed by another two of the Lord's men, assault rifles in their arms and grins on their faces. That's why the crowd never stormed the building, Kate thought. They were waiting for the professionals to do it for them. "I'm sorry," she yelled to Raj and Lorraine. "We're dead. I love you guys. Goodbye." And that's the end of chapter 21. So yeah, that went about as well as you might have predicted. So before I dive straight into chapter 22, again, a discussion question is, what's your favourite novel of all time? I think I've got about 5 favourites. One of them's 1984 for obvious reasons. I think it's one of the most important works of fiction that's ever been devised. And then there were none by Agatha Christie, just because it's so cleverly planned. It's the one with 10 people on an island. One of them is killing the others, and you're not quite sure who it is. You'd think that as the number of suspects goes down, it will be more and more obvious because there are fewer suspects, but it just gets more confusing in the best possible way. Sarah says 1984 changed my life. It certainly made me change the way I saw lots of things. I read it in my first year at university, and I remember the eureka moments, or the wow moments when I read George Orwell's perspective for the first time, and his rather disturbing insights into what authority figures could do and would do if they could get away with it. Other than that, the Hunger Games trilogy. I'm a massive Hunger Games fanboy. It's just incredible. I like the fact that it's not just a bunch of young people killing each other, and that's the novel. It's more than anything else. It's a war story. In fact, it was actually pitched to the publisher as a war story, not a reality TV story or a love triangle story. I think it is ultimately about war, even though it takes you the first 2 books before the war really gets going. It is about war. What are the other ones? Gone by Michael Grant, and not just because Michael Grant provided a quote for Underdogs. It has the best opening lines of any book I've ever read. It steps straight into the storyline straight away. One moment the teacher was talking about the Civil War, the next year was gone. There, gone. No puff, no explosion. He just vanished. And then the class looked at each other and think, "Wait, did you just see that? What happened?" And then they start walking through the rest of the school, seeing that all of the other adults have vanished. Then they go out into the streets and find that there are no adults anywhere. Straight away, it jumps straight into the plot, but just so in such a dare I say realistic way. Obviously, adults vanishing isn't very realistic, but it is how young people would react if it were to happen. Hello, Daniel. And so, Wrinkle in Time and... I don't think I've heard of that. You'll have to tell me what that's about. Glad to see you're a Hunger Games fan as well, though. Anyway, I think I kept you in suspense long enough. So, Chapter 22. And I'm really sorry, this is not in New London. It's McCormick, back at Spitfire's Rise. You'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out what actually happened in New London. Chapter 22. McCormick was in his bed, or on it at least. He'd been too lethargic to pull the covers over himself. It must have been early afternoon. He hadn't wasted a whole morning in bed for nearly 2 years, but it was a frighteningly comfortable addiction. You can't get into this habit, Polly's voice sounded in his head, echoing lines from years gone by. You'll lose everything you are. Those words had helped, back when he had only lost his wife. They were less comforting after he had lost a war. McCormick checked his watch and sighed. Any longer, and he would have to pretend he was ill. The expectations of his surviving housemates forced him to the edge of his bed, and he slid his feet into the nearest pair of shoes. He mopped his brow with a limp hand, and tried to put his leader face back on. Yeah, that's what they don't tell you about leadership and about circumstances where other people are emotionally dependent on you. Being, it's a privilege and an honour and everything like that, but often it can be surprisingly lonely. You're about to see that with McCormick. He tried to put his leader face back on. His first stop was the clinic. Shannon made no reaction as he brushed open the door. She was sitting alone on her bed, staring at the ceiling as if counting cracks. She seemed to do little else with her days, content to keep herself isolated and inactive. Perhaps being alive was enough. Shannon, McCormick said, to no response. Just days ago, he had thought of her silence as a sign of vulnerability, but his friends were missing while she was safe. Vulnerable or not, the girl on the bed had lost the right to remain silent. You must know about our mission to Hartford, he said. I've given you a few days before asking about Lieutenant Lambourne, but we need to get to the bottom of it. No answer. We found the people you lived with, including him, and I'm sorry. No answer. McCormick's tone was unusually impatient, and he knew why. He could no longer deny that Shannon was the reason his friends were missing. She may not have pulled any triggers, but perhaps the world might have been better off if Tyler had completed his mission. It was an uncharacteristic thought, and McCormick hated it. When you're comfortable talking, he said, I need to know how you came to live in that health centre, and why one of Grant's lieutenants was living with you. And how you were found, he thought. Because if it can happen there, it can happen here. No questions asked, Shannon said. That was the deal. Shannon turned her head away from this. McCormick sighed. He had almost forgotten her catchphrase. Could you at least tell me what my friends are supposed to do with better days? As in the USB stick. Shannon turned her head away from the ceiling above her, eyebrows raised. You think they're alive, she said, amused. I hope they're alive. And if they are, they need to know what to do once they're in the clone factory. To keep your part of the deal, what do you think? Asked Shannon. Find a computer and plug in the memory stick. And then? Then you activate the kill switch on the wall, a red lever somewhere at the back. McCormick said nothing. He wanted the silence to feel like encouragement for her to continue, but instead it just felt cold. Lambourne and I wrote a software code that would override the factory's safeguards, she said. Those settings that stop the wrong liquids going down the wrong pipes, or the cubicle doors from opening before soldiers are fully grown. After that, it reverses as many processes as it can to make the machines choke on their own backwash. So run the software, throw the switch back on, and watch the fun. Throw a grenade down there for good measure if you want. Some of the spilt liquids will be flammable. Of course, McCormick thought, all this information is useless if the strike team are dead. I'm tired of not knowing, and Lorraine has been at comms with Raj for more than 24 hours. I think it's time for a swap. Thank you, Shannon, McCormick said, out of courtesy and little more. Lorraine will be back with you soon. Shannon reverted back into silent mode, and McCormick was happy to leave her alone to stare at the clinic ceiling. But before he could leave Spitfire's Rise, there was one more conversation that needed to happen. Conveniently, Mark's bedroom was next door. Took you long enough, he muttered when McCormick entered. Excuse me? The police got to me in 6 minutes last time I broke the rules. When I lead a mission outside of your authority, it takes 2 days to show up. I was hoping you would use the time to reflect, McCormick replied. It was partly true. Mark shrugged his bulky shoulders and went back to reading his book. Mark, he said, I don't have long. Then let me go through the main points you're about to mention. Yes, I disobeyed your greater wisdom. No, I don't regret it. Yes, we learned a ton from it. The only thing left to discuss is what the hell you can do about it. He waited until the end of his little speech before looking in McCormick's direction, pressuring him to give an answer. So you don't already know that too? Asked McCormick, resisting the urge to add, since you're clearly the cleverest person in the building. Sinking to Mark's level would not do him any favours. Hi, Maria. Some months ago, Mark answered, Miles and Tim did a similar thing. You kept them at home for a month as punishment. And they weren't 18 like me. They were proper adults. So that was a ballsy move. But you won't do that now. And why not? Asked McCormick. Partly because the next time you let them out, Oliver Roth killed Miles with a shotgun blast to the face. Maybe it was a month's lack of practice, or maybe just coincidence. I guess we'll never know. But the main reason is because you can't afford to keep me at home. Who else is left to lead the charge? Gracie? Silent Simon? Mark was right, and McCormick knew it. Thankfully, he had known for a long time, so the words did not shock him. Hello, Martin. Mark, he began. I know you've spent most of your teenage years with crime and punishment at the front of your mind, but there's more to the Underdogs than that. I don't expect you to follow our rules because you fear the consequences. I expect you to follow them because it's the right thing to do. Mark turned back to his book. You're right, McCormick continued. There's very little I can do, and even if I dish out a punishment, it won't be enough to stop you from making the wrong choices. The only person who can do that is you. About 100 teachers gave me the same talk about making the right... And this is about so much more than following rules, Mark. If the worst has happened, if you and Alex really are the last soldiers capable of leadership, then you've got an even bigger question to ask. What kind of head soldier do you want to be? And if the war really is lost, you've got the biggest question of all. What kind of man do you want to die as? Leadership changes people, Mark. That in itself is a responsibility. You need to let yourself be changed in the right direction. Couple of comments. Other than those last two, Julie, Hiding from the Night and The Alchemist, I entirely agree because I've not read those last two. And Sherlock Holmes. I need to read/watch more Sherlock Holmes. Mark turned the page of his book. It was better than a sarcastic comeback, at least. Mark and Shannon both giving me the silent treatment. Maybe this is what parenting would have been like. McCormick left the bedroom and took a deep breath. He would make the journey to comms alone after saying goodbye to the others. But first things first. Stood on the landing, making one final check for passers-by, he reached into the nearest empty bedroom to borrow a chair. He opened the trapdoor on the ceiling and pulled down the ladder. In the past, he had lied to his team about saying he had to check the attic for rats. Ewan had even called him out on it before the mission began. 10 points to anyone who remembers that. I think it was chapter 6-ish. In reality, he had given up the fight against rodents a long time ago, but there was a tradition that had to be kept every time he left Spitfire's rise. McCormick closed the trapdoor and concealed himself inside the attic, the only part of the house where he could truly be alone, then crawled to the aging cardboard box next to the boiler. Nobody else knew whose house the Underdogs had taken over, with the sole exception of Ewan. What they did not know, they could not give away through interrogation. It was a safe assumption that Daniel Amopoulos, the last one to be captured, had given away everyone's names before he died. Thankfully, he could not give away the location of Spitfire's rise. By twisted fortune, Grant had captured the one underdog with such severe directional dyslexia that he wouldn't even have been able to describe the route. McCormick could never tell his soldiers that each day they walked on his carpets, slept in his beds, and ate from his cupboards. Last year, letting a dozen people into his home would have been a Christmas party. Now it was his life, 24/7. His honeymoon photo was the first object out of the memory box. 41 years and 8 months after being taken, the photo still portrayed Barbara with the natural elegance he had always remembered about her. That moment in Anglesey sealed for eternity in a flawless glass frame. With a gentle brush to wipe the dust from her face, he gave her a kiss as always. Barbara McCormick, now 3 years dead, had made Joseph McCormick the man he was. She could never have known the responsibility the future would place on her husband, but somehow she had prepared him for it. With Britain in ruins, and its people all but conquered, Joseph owed it to her memory to be the man she had built him up to be. He owed it to her to keep others safe, even if it meant hiding them in his own home. And that's the end of chapter 22. Just turned the page to chapter 23, and it's a long one and a good one. And the one after, yeah, you're going to enjoy tomorrow. Right, so yeah, that's the little twist at the end of that chapter. Turns out they're living in McCormick's house. Well, the exact truth of it is revealed later on, but having believed for 11 months that they're just sheltering in some stranger's house, turns out that it's actually where McCormick lived long before the takeover. You'll find out some more details later on. In the meantime, a nice big conversation about Sherlock Holmes has happened in the comments, persuading me even more that I do need to have more exposure to it. Benedict Cumberbatch is pretty awesome. If Peter Capaldi can't play Nicholas Grant, Benedict Cumberbatch is going to play Nicholas Grant. I'm declaring it now. Right, so other than that, I think we're done for the day. So feel free to keep leaving answers to the discussion question in the comments. We've had quite a few of them this evening. And beyond that, I will see you tomorrow, and hopefully I won't fall asleep on the sofa again. Bye-bye.